At 4:18 a.m. local time, a Project 10,410 Svetlyak patrol boat raced toward the Kerch Strait at nearly 30 knots. 16 kilometers remained. Less than 17 minutes separated its crew from defended waters. They believed they only had to survive a little longer. They were wrong. 8 Ukrainian strike drones were closing from behind. Ahead, helicopters could rise from Kerch within minutes, and between them stood the ship's last hard defense, an AK-630, capable of throwing 5,000 rounds into the air every minute. On paper, the patrol boat held every advantage. Ukraine faced the harder problem. If the drones attacked together, they would enter the same wall of fire. If they spread too far apart, the ship could reach Kerch before the attack came together. Ukraine did not need to sink it immediately. It only needed to take away one advantage at a time: awareness, direction, speed. Before sunrise, most of the drones would be gone. The crew would believe they had escaped more than once, and Kerch, the place they were racing toward for safety, would become the place where they ran out of choices. But the first drone was not sent to attack. It was sent to learn how the ship would try to survive. 90 seconds earlier, a Ukrainian reconnaissance drone had detected the ship through its engine heat and wake, then confirmed its speed and heading. The target was a Project 10,410 Svetlyak patrol boat operating south of Kerch. It had been patrolling the approaches to Crimea, searching for unmanned threats moving toward the strait. Ukraine did not attack. For nearly 90 seconds, the operators studied the vessel. They measured its actual speed, its course toward Kerch, and the time required to complete a turn. They also mapped the AK-630's firing arcs and identified the radar and optical sensors above the bridge. None of those details mattered alone. Together, they revealed the first weakness in the Svetlyak's escape. The AK-630 could dominate one approach at a time, but the mount could not protect every side of the ship equally, while the patrol boat continued racing northeast. To bring its strongest defense onto a threat from another direction, the crew would have to turn the vessel itself. Every successful defense would therefore demand the same payment: speed, distance, or control of the route toward Kerch. Every second mattered. At nearly 55 kilometers per hour, the Svetlyak could cover more than 900 meters every minute. A single minute of delay would carry it almost another kilometer toward the defended waters around Kerch. Then low clouds moved over the area. The reconnaissance drone descended to recover a clear view of the ship. The maneuver restored the visual feed, but it also brought the UAV closer to the patrol boat's radar coverage. The radar crew detected the contact. Warning lights appeared across the bridge. Sailors left routine patrol stations and moved toward the gun mount, optical sights, and damage control positions. Seconds earlier, they had been searching the sea for unmanned threats. Now, one was watching them. The Svetlyak accelerated and turned northeast toward Kerch. The patrol had become an escape: hold the route and leave one side exposed, or turn to defend it and surrender more of the distance still separating the ship from safety. The Svetlyak was running toward Kerch. Ukraine now knew how to make every successful defense slow it down. Less than 2 minutes later, the first FP-1 broke away from the formation. It was not sent to sink the ship. Its job was to force the Svetlyak to reveal how it would defend itself. The drone dropped lower and approached directly from astern. 3,000 meters. The patrol boat held its course toward Kerch. 2,000 meters. The AK-630 began rotating toward the stern. 1,200 meters. The gun crew committed to the target. The 6-barrel cannon opened fire in short bursts. At roughly 5,000 rounds per minute, a burst lasting only 2 seconds could throw more than 160 rounds across the drone's path. The FP-1 survived the first burst and crossed the ship's wake. The second burst destroyed it before it reached the stern. Russia had won the first exchange. The Svetlyak remained intact, lost almost no speed, and continued northeast toward Kerch. But the loss had already given Ukraine what it needed. The gun was most effective when the target remained inside one steady firing arc. To keep it there, the ship had to hold its course, or turn to support the weapon. Any larger correction would cost the Svetlyak speed, disturb its heading, and add distance to the run toward Kerch. For the first time, Ukraine could see the limit hidden inside the ship's strongest defense. The remaining 7 aircraft reorganized immediately. 3 stayed behind the vessel. 3 began a wide turn toward the southeast. The final drone stayed farther back and slightly higher, keeping the ship near the edge of its camera view while relaying each change in heading. Ukraine could absorb the loss of 1 FP-1. The Svetlyak could not defend every direction without changing course. Russia had destroyed the first attacker. Ukraine had exposed the ship's defensive pattern. The first drone had died inside the Svetlyak's strongest firing arc. The next 3 were already moving around it. While 3 drones kept the Svetlyak looking backward, 3 others were already flying nearly 12 kilometers out of their way to get ahead of it. The trailing group repeatedly entered the outer edge of the ship's search picture, then pulled away before the crew could engage cleanly. The pressure never disappeared. Russian sailors remained at their stations. The AK-630 stayed ready. No one aboard could assume the next contact was another feint. But the 3 drones moving southeast faced the harder problem. The longer route consumed fuel they might need during the final approach. A major turn by the Svetlyak could leave them waiting in the wrong position. If they accelerated too early, they could arrive before the trailing group had fixed Russian attention behind the ship. The timing had to be exact. Then one of the rear drones committed. It dropped toward the wake and accelerated. The Svetlyak turned hard to port. The drone crossed behind the stern, missed the hull, and exploded several dozen meters off the starboard quarter. Russia had survived a second attack, but this time, the escape carried a visible cost. During the turn, the patrol boat's speed briefly fell from nearly 30 knots to roughly 21. By the time it recovered and turned back toward Kerch, the maneuver had already taken another piece out of its escape window. Together, the earlier corrections and the latest hard turn had cost the Svetlyak nearly 2 minutes. A vessel holding 30 knots could have covered more than 1.5 kilometers in that time. The ship had not been hit, but every maneuver against the drones behind it allowed the outer group to close from ahead. For the first time, some Ukrainian drones were no longer chasing the Svetlyak. They were moving to meet it. The outer group was finally moving into position when the reconnaissance feed began to fail. As the Svetlyak closed on Kerch, the reconnaissance link entered a crowded electronic environment filled with coastal radar emissions, military communications, and interference from shore. The live feed started to lag and skip. Then the image broke into blocks of distorted pixels. It froze. A moment later, the ship disappeared. For 20 seconds, Ukraine had no target. At its current speed, the Svetlyak could travel nearly 300 meters during that time. But distance was not the real danger. Direction was. If the ship continued toward Kerch, the 3 outer drones could still intercept it. If it turned toward open water, the entire Ukrainian formation could end up on the wrong side of the chase. The operators had 2 choices. They could split the remaining 6 drones and begin searching, weakening the final attack. Or they could keep the formation intact and gamble that Kerch remained the ship's fastest route to protection. They held the formation. Breaking it apart could destroy the only coordinated strike Ukraine had left. 5 seconds, 10, 15, 20. The relay drone shifted farther offshore and changed altitude, searching for a cleaner line of sight to the outer group. The picture began to rebuild. The Svetlyak had not escaped. During the blackout, it had moved closer to the Crimean coast. The ship no longer stood alone against open water. Its outline blended into shoreline clutter, harbor lights, and coastal structures. But the larger problem was position. Instead of crossing the Svetlyak's route from ahead, the outer group was now converging too far along one side of the ship. A single turn could carry the patrol boat away from the interception line. Ukraine had recovered the ship, but the formation now had fuel for only one major correction, and the new angle was already wrong. The next threat did not come from the Svetlyak. It came from Kerch. AK-29 lifted from the northern side of the strait. Coastal radar guided it toward the contacts trailing the patrol boat. On Ukrainian screens, a fast-moving contact appeared from the north and began cutting across the drone's escape paths. From altitude, the helicopter could search a much wider section of sea. It could descend quickly, change direction freely, and close without losing speed the way the ship did. Below it, the UAVs had almost nowhere to hide. The Ka-29 found the first trailing drone soon after entering the search area. The UAV broke toward open water and dropped closer to the surface. The helicopter cut across the turn, descended behind it, and narrowed the escape path. The drone made one final correction toward the waves, but the K-29 crossed above it and closed the remaining distance. Seconds later, the feed went dark. The final trailing UAV turned west. This time, the purpose was not escape. It was to pull the helicopter away from the Svetlyak. For several moments, the move worked. The Ka-29 followed, forcing its pilot to choose between returning to the ship or finishing the target already inside reach. The patrol boat was falling farther behind on the helicopter's display, but abandoning the pursuit would leave the drone free to reverse course and rejoin the attack. The pilot stayed with the target. The second feed disappeared moments later, but the chase had carried the helicopter farther west and bought the outer group more time. 2 drones had already been lost against the Svetlyak. The Ka-29 had now eliminated 2 more. Half of Ukraine's original formation was gone before a single warhead had touched the hull. Only 3 strike drones and the relay aircraft remained. Less than 6 minutes separated the patrol boat from the inner approaches to Kerch. Russia needed to keep it alive for only a few more minutes, but the helicopter was now hunting in the direction Ukraine no longer needed. That mattered because the helicopter had committed itself to the wrong side of the chase. Correcting their approach had consumed most of the outer drone's remaining fuel. None had enough range for a second attack run. 2 moved toward the Svetlyak's starboard bow. The third remained wider, positioned to cut off any turn away from Kerch. They were still undetected. The helicopter had cleared the sky behind the ship. It had not cleared the sky ahead of it. The 3 surviving strike drones separated again. One spent most of its remaining fuel cutting behind the Svetlyak and entering the sector already cleared by the Ka-29. The other 2 stayed low to the southeast and continued toward the ship's forward starboard side. Above them, the relay aircraft held the tracking link together. Russian radar began receiving contacts from opposite directions. The crew had only seconds to choose: keep the AK-630 facing aft and leave the bow exposed, or rotate it forward and allow the trailing drone to close. The Svetlyak tried to solve both problems with one maneuver. It turned hard to port, attempting to keep the drone behind it inside the gun's arc while denying the 2 aircraft ahead a clean approach. But nearly 30 knots of momentum could not be erased by turning the rudder. Momentum carried the hull forward. The stern slid across the water. Speed fell, and its direct run toward Kerch collapsed into a wide turn. Then the trailing drone accelerated into the wake. The AK-630 opened fire. The UAV dropped lower and made one final correction, but the next burst crossed its path. Its feed went dark. Russia had destroyed another attacker. 5 of Ukraine's original 8 aircraft were now gone in less than 12 minutes. But the successful engagement had pulled the gun completely toward the stern. At the same moment, one of the 2 forward drones crossed inside the distance the gun could cover before impact. The Svetliak still had engines, radar, and weapons. What it no longer had was control over its own movement. Every turn now answered the drones. Every burst cost speed. The ship was still running, but no longer toward Kerch on the crew's terms. The gun had destroyed the drone behind the ship. It could not turn fast enough to stop the one already descending ahead of it. The drone descending ahead of the Svetlyak did not aim for the hull. It aimed for the ship's eyes. Crewmen on the forward deck opened fire, but the UAV had already crossed the point where they had enough time to correct their aim. It stayed low through the final few hundred meters and struck the forward superstructure near the radar and fire control equipment. The explosion did not sink the patrol boat. It did not stop the engines, but the radar picture flickered, then became intermittent. One electro-optical camera went dark, while damaged deck cabling interrupted communications between several stations. The AK-630 could still fire. Finding and tracking the next target would now take longer. The Svetlyak corrected its course toward Kerch and accelerated again. Only 2 Ukrainian aircraft remained: the relay, UAV, and one final strike drone. A low fuel warning appeared beside the last drone's telemetry. It had less than a minute before it no longer had enough fuel to complete the final dive. The drone approached from the rear port side, close enough to keep the surviving guns pointed upward. Tracer fire crossed behind it as the UAV leveled out, where the gun crews could still track it, but could no longer fire cleanly. It was not beginning the final attack. It was holding the crew's attention. Below, the patrol boat still had engines and weapons. What it no longer had was a complete picture of the battle around it. Then two contacts appeared close to the surface. They were not aircraft. Ukraine had kept them outside the chase until the Svetlyak lost its clear picture of the battle. While the surviving sensors and gun crews remained focused on the sky, two unmanned surface vessels were closing from the south. The Ukrainian drone held behind the stern, burning through the final margin of its fuel. The air attack had already taken away the Svetlyak's awareness. Now the surface attack was forcing the ship to choose which direction it could no longer defend. The two USVs widened apart as they closed on opposite sides of the Svetlyak. A deck-mounted machine gun swung toward the water. Seconds later, the AK-630 followed. One USV exploded under cannon fire. The second kept closing, keeping the ship's remaining weapons committed to the surface threat. The moment both weapons turned toward the water, the final strike drone committed. On the bridge, the surface contacts now filled the surviving displays. By the time a lookout pointed back toward the sky, the UAV had already begun its final dive. 900 meters, 600, 300. At that closing speed, the final few hundred meters left barely 7 seconds to react. By the time the damaged sensors reacquired the UAV, the AK-630 had only begun turning upward. It was too late. The drone struck the upper deck near the gun mount and exposed combat system equipment. The explosion cut power to the mount, damaged the ammunition feed, and tore through nearby fire control cabling. The gun mount jerked once, then stopped. Fire spread across the deck. Black smoke covered the bridge as communication between stations broke down, and the Svetlyak slowed into a widening turn. The surviving USV continued toward the stern, threatening the shortest route back toward Kerch and forcing the ship into another turn. By the time the Ka-29 turned back toward the ship, the Svetlyak was already burning and could no longer mount an organized defense. Russia had destroyed most of Ukraine's original formation, but each successful reaction had taken away another part of the ship's freedom to move, detect, and defend. The Svetlyak was not defeated by one perfect strike. It was stripped of one advantage at a time, and the larger warning reached beyond one patrol boat. If a vessel supported by coastal radar and a Ka-29 could still be isolated this close to Kerch, then the approaches to the strait were no longer a protected rear area. They had become part of the battlefield. What really defeated the Svetlyak? The final 7 seconds, or every forced turn that came before them?